The other day, I had two Dexcom G7 sensors fail back to back. They just wouldn't connect to the app. And with a 50-day trip to Europe coming around the corner, I panicked. What if this happened to me while I was abroad? So I took it to social media, I posted a video on my platforms, and I never expected the response I got. Nearly 1,000 comments. I was not alone. Welcome to the show. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and research. And today we're talking Dexcom G7. Now, let me just say, I love the Dexcom G7. It's been working really well for me for a while now, and I reviewed it on YouTube, so you can watch that and hear more of what I think. But there have been some issues that I've been hearing around the community. And so when this happened to me, when I got all these responses, I knew I had to talk about it. Today, my guest and I will dive into rising reports of sensor connectivity problems, applicator issues like this now infamous goosenecking, and we take a step back to look at the bigger picture. Every CGM has its problems, but is Dexcom under the spotlight simply because it has the largest user base and the most vocal community? Well, to help me unpack everything, I'm joined by Kamil from Nerdabetic on YouTube. He covers diabetes tech and he's posted a video about the recent Dexcom developments, and Dr. An, an endocrinologist who also reports on the tech. I did reach out to Dexcom about the topics we brought up. They responded. I've got their comments in the link down in the show notes. It's at diabetic.info. And since this failure, I have heard from the community that if a sensor goes in and it does not connect to the app, if you have a magnet or you use the applicator's magnet, which you can see from the device, and you just kind of move it around the device, around its edges, it may be able to activate the sensor. So if this happens to you, please do try that. And maybe take a magnet on vacation. Keep in mind that all of my content is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show, David. It's good to have you back. And Kamil, it's your first time on here. It's so good to have you.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I'm excited to be back, especially with both of you guys. You guys are like legends in my book, so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I was very excited to have both of you in the digital room. Right now we have Kamil in London, David, you're in California, and I'm in Valencia. So we're coming from you all around the world. But yeah, this will be an interesting conversation. So I brought you both on because you both have good perspectives from like two different areas of the community. And the first thing I wanted to kind of start with, Kamil, you had a video come out on YouTube, which got into a lot of what we're going to talk about today. But one thing specifically that you talked about was this FDA warning that Dexcom received. Can you tell us a little bit about what that warning was?
Yeah, sure. So I probably should take a step back and look at like a helicopter view of what a warning letter is. So for those of you who might be new to the space or might not know some of the kind of background to all of this, FDA will regularly review approved product. So, I think in the community, we probably have very good coverage of when a new product is approved, like G6, G7. But then once that is done, they will also do ongoing kind of checks, inspections to ensure what was kind of originally submitted, that all of the processes, all of the testing kind of is up to scratch and there haven't been any changes. So Dexcom is not by any stretch of the imagination the only company that kind of in the community with a warning letter. We had Medtronic had one a few years ago. There are kind of different levels to warning letters. So some of them are very significant where FDA will not allow that particular company to gain any future approvals for a product. So that's the one that Medtronic had a few years ago when they had the crack on the Medtronic pumps. Some people watching might have experienced that themselves, which obviously impacts kind of their future product pipeline. This was nowhere near as material as that, so there was no impact on their ability to market, sell, or get future approvals. But FDA did flag a few underlying issues with the fact that they haven't really been forthcoming about some changes that they've made to the actual sensors since they've been approved. So the specific thing that they flagged out is just different components that were used in the sensors. So they submitted saying these are the different parts that are going to be in each G6 and G7, and Dexcom changed some of those behind the scenes. Now, in my point of view on this is that the underlying reason for this was really good. They wanted to make sure they have different factories, different like approaches to put sensors together, which I think is a good thing. Obviously, they were just not as forthcoming and transparent about that as probably they should be, and kind of that's why FDA decided to go public and share the warning letter.
Yeah, and Dexcom was still allowed to sell their sensors. They stopped selling these sensors because they were found to be less accurate. And it's possible some of the things that we're going to get into today, I don't know for sure, but it's possible that some of the issues people are experiencing could be from those sensors that were sold before this letter that was given to them at the end of March, which really isn't that long ago. I did reach out to Dexcom for comment on this, and those comments will be at the link down in the show notes. Before we dive deeper into Dexcom, I do want to just be fair to all CGMs and Dexcom. David, isn't it normal for CGMs to have failures and to not be 100% accurate?
Yeah, I think that is something that is really important. The reality is that CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, they all have their inherent flaws. And there are certain flaws associated with the form factor, the most conventional form factor, right? That the Medtronic sensors use, that the Dexcom sensors use, that the Freestyle Libre sensors use. And, Kamil did a really good job kind of going over the various failure rates, or like the percentage of sensors that don't last the full duration of time that they're supposed to. And it's kind of surprising when you're presented with the statistics. I think, for the Libre systems, or for the Libre and the Dexcom G7, I think they're close to 80%, only about 80% are lasting the full 14 or 15 days. And as you pointed out in a previous video, Justin, the 15-day Dexcom G7, it's like just under 75% are lasting the full 15 days in their clinical trials. So these numbers are fairly close to each other. So yeah, this is not necessarily a Dexcom specific problem. And as we discuss, the topic today, I think it's important to realize that. Another thing I think that's really important to point out is that part of this might seem more like a Dexcom issue, and it may just be a fact that the majority of people with type 1 diabetes are using Dexcom sensors, especially in the United States. And the burden of proof of using something to manage type 1 diabetes is so much higher than using it to manage type 2 diabetes, especially if you're not on insulin. The closest analogy I can think of is like, imagine you make shoes, right? You're like a shoe manufacturer. Making a shoe for someone who's just going to go to school and work in a 9-to-5 cubicle is very different than the quality that you're going to be held to if you're supplying shoes for marathon runners or ultra marathon runners. So it doesn't mean that the shoe for the daily person is better because the daily 8 to 5 worker isn't having problems. How the sensor is being used is very different in different audiences. So there might be more extra scrutiny being placed on the Dexcom because people with type 1 diabetes are relying more frequently on the Dexcoms. And that will be that's what makes me excited to see what will happen over time as other sensors like Libre, Medtronic, Eversense get more market share and use in the type 1 community, because maybe we'll find out that there are problems everywhere. Or we might find out that some of these problems that are being highlighted are more unique to Dexcom. So we don't know. So I don't necessarily see this as a Dexcom issue just yet. It's just more visible in the Dexcom issue, in the Dexcom population.
Actually, just to carry out the shoes analogy, as we wear in sensors for a longer period of time, part of this is just simple physiology. Like, as I think we need to be really clear, also distinguishing like the regular wear and tear and like one-off incidents like the warning letters that we've just talked about. It's like in the ongoing business as usual world, as sensors are worn for longer, the wear time just is very organic that they will last for a short period of time. Like if you look at the new 15-day G7 data, it's like you mentioned, David, it's not too far the longer wear of Libres. And I think that's really important context.
This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. As someone with T1D and with an incredibly active lifestyle, it's important for me not to get tied up, especially with tubes on my insulin pump. I love to go swimming, lift weights, and play kickball with friends. And with Omnipod 5, I never have to worry about tubes getting in the way. Plus, not having to disconnect helps me to stay in range during all of my favorite physical activities. That includes sexy time too. See if you're eligible for a 10-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. That's omnipod.com/diabetic. I put out this video on social media across all my platforms. I got nearly 1,000 comments of people saying different problems they were having revolving their G7s, because I myself had an issue where 2 sensors failed in a row. And it was a bit traumatizing to me because I was about to hop on a flight to Europe for 50 days. What if all of my G7s failed? And also, they're not going to send them to me in Europe. So I was really worried, and I thought that was a good opportunity to crowdsource information. Did I expect almost 1,000 comments? No. So that's not nothing, right? Kamil, what are you hearing from people in the community regarding the G7?
On the point that David raised about Libre and Dexcom, I think this is a really important point. I think we tend to, in my opinion, hear a lot more anecdotal evidence from Dexcom users because they tend to be, I would say type 1s, but also more broadly, people who are probably looked after by secondary care. People like David, whereas I think in Europe especially, Libre has played really well as a primary care device. And I think the feedback loop that you hear from, this is a bit of a generalization, but I think generally speaking, we hear less social media noise from the Libre user group than a Dexcom user group. So I think that context is important because just the population is very different. But within the Dexcom pool, I would say I'm hearing a lot of comments regarding sensors that particularly have been manufactured in the Malaysian Dexcom factory. I think that is one of the things that when someone reaches out to me, and I don't have a statistic to quote you, but I have had a lot of comments and emails and things from G7 users. One of the first things I reply back is, would you be able to check where the manufacturing location was on that box? Because it's most likely than not that it was probably in Malaysia.
Interesting. What about you, David? What are you hearing from your patients?
Yeah, it's a really good distinction. So I have seen probably what you guys all see online, a lot of discourse. So that naturally, I don't know these people online. I think technically are commonly, it's the people that are unhappy that are going to be the most vocal. So I try to take things with a grain of salt. So recently I have been polling my patients because I do feel like there's been an uptick on social media discourse. And, I do find that the majority of people, even with type 1 diabetes, are still overall pretty happy with the Dexcom G7. I would say like 80 to 90%, I'll ask them, they're like, no major issues. Or even the ones that have some minor issues, I say, okay, would you like to downgrade the G6? And they're like, oh no, I don't want to go back to G6. So a lot of people, to be fair, are very happy on the G7. Like I said, 80 to 90%.
I love my G7.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
great.
Or they'll be like, flaws and all, I really like the 30-minute warm-up.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, right. So I guess that puts a lot of things in perspective. But that being said, I do think from people I know personally, and I would count you among them, Justin, it seems like there's a little bit more frustration or a little bit more struggle with the sensor. And what's hard, though, is that it doesn't seem to necessarily be the same problem, right? So, it'd be one thing if, every person's like, oh, yeah, this is definitely a problem. Everybody's having the adhesive issue or everyone's having, connectivity problems. But it's a variety of things, which makes it really hard to put your finger on. We'll probably talk about this later or soon, but there's this thing called goosenecking where the sensor really never starts. And if you look at it very closely, it's like there's little, it looks like the tip of a paper clip. That little curved part is kind of poking out of that hole. Some people complain that, the sensor just never starts. Some people complain that, after day 7 or 8, just the accuracy seems very, very unreliable. Adhesive issues, connectivity issues. And I kind of hear a variety of all these different things. And so it's kind of hard to put my finger on exactly what the problem is, which is so weird, you know?
Yeah, and some of the things you list off do just sound like general continuous glucose monitor
Totally fair.
problems.
Yeah.
We've come so far in the last, I think it's been 26 years since the first professional CGM came out. I just had a conversation about like the evolution of CGMs, and like we're still pretty young in this whole area. There still are problems. Accuracy is not perfect for everyone, but I mean, also they've gotten really good, right? So, but a couple that you did list off that seem to be very Dexcom related are the goosenecking, which I've had happen to me once. I've heard about it happening to other people. It hasn't been a widespread issue for me, just that one time. And what I noticed was, the sensor just kept saying like it's not working, and once I looked at it, I could see that little loop. So definitely something for people to look out for. If like always look at that little hole on the sensor. If you see a little loop, that's the sensor. It's not in your skin most likely. So that's probably a failed sensor. Now, the other issue that just affected me that really scared me, and it's affecting a lot of people, is the sensor not connecting. Like you type in the code and it just cannot find it. One solution I've heard about, and Kamil, I'd love to hear if you've been hearing about this and what the success rate may be. I've heard that some people, what may be happening here with some of these is that the magnet within the applicator is not activating the sensor, because what's supposed to happen is once you put it on, that's like when the warm up starts, because the magnet detaches. The sensor in this case sometimes doesn't realize that. So what I've heard, a lot of people are seeing success, is that they put the applicator on the sensor and move it around a little bit, or you can get any magnet, move it around it, and then it activates it. Kamil, have you been hearing about that from people? Have you ever done it yourself at all?
No, so I have been one of the early. Actually, UK was the first country to go live with G7, and I was one of the. So we had a thing called 7 on G7. So one of the 7 users of first G7 users outside of clinical trials in the UK. So, and I've been on G7 ever since. So this was 2022. So one of the oldest G7 users probably on the planet outside of clinical trials, which I'm really happy to have that honor. It hasn't happened to me. No, I've never had that problem. The what you've described though, the automatic warm up system, is exactly how that works. So there's that metal component that you said, which automatically starts it, which for those of you who are using it, that's why we can have the no warm up time benefit, right? Because it just automatically, you don't have to physically do anything in the app. But if I can't speak from personal experience because it hasn't happened to me.
Yeah, and I didn't get a chance to try it because I didn't know about the trick when I had these 2 sensors fail. I finally had one work, and it
Yeah, I'm super online, and I have seen that surface a lot on like Reddit and social media. I mean, it makes sense, like Camille says. Just to kind of clarify for the viewers, so there is a magnet in the inserter, and so when the sensor detaches from the magnet, when you're inserting it, it naturally triggers the startup of the sensor. So the theory here with this fix is that perhaps that magnet relationship isn't functioning properly when the sensor is being inserted, so it doesn't realize, and it doesn't start itself because it doesn't realize it's been separated from the magnet. And so that's why holding the magnet over the sensor may fix that problem, to kind of like force that signal through to say, hey, it's time to start your session.
Yeah, so I sent both of you Dexcom's response to the questions I put out, which were regarding a lot of these things. What are your thoughts on their response?
I was initially really disappointed. I think I was very much looking forward to this conversation. I guess, stepping back, I was very much looking forward to this conversation because I think it's really interesting that all 3 of us landed on this topic somewhat independently, right? Like, I've been wanting to talk about this more. I was really, happy, Justin, when I saw your video about the survivability, your issues. Camille, I was really happy with your video talking about the FDA warning letter. Just because I think all 3 of us, your platforms are like 100 times bigger than mine, but I think we all take what we do very seriously, and I don't think we like to just sling mud. And we take there's a lot of responsibility. We try not to, be sensationalist, but I think it's important that we all have seen enough of this that we thought it was worth addressing. I think just over the years, especially with the G7, for whatever reason, Dexcom's responses have been very anodyne and sterile and very like corporate in their response. And so I was really hopeful that just given your visibility, I know you have really good relationships with them, that they would be able to give a little bit of insight into what's really going on. Because I think when I read the comments, it's all kind of corporate speak, and it's really kind of PR moves, which I feel like is actually alienating and frustrating for consumers because I think we, both the patients or people with diabetes and the providers, are seeing something, and so it kind of feels a little bit like gaslighting when we're told that like kind of nothing is wrong and it's business as usual.
Yeah, I was just a bit disappointed having read what they said. I think I will. I think that the point that I made earlier in that conversation, that the feedback loop that we hear from the community on Dexcom sensors is a lot heavier than Libre sensors. So it's like, from an anecdotal perspective, it's very difficult to compare. Having said that, on the new factory, for example, that we've discussed earlier in Malaysia, Abbott opened a brand new factory for Freestyle Libre 3 in November of last year, which has been operational now for 8 months. I think we all very well connected in the community. Like, the fact that I haven't really heard a single piece of feedback about Libre 3 sensors, and they've gone through that whole colossally complex process of setting up a new manufacturing site, setting up new supply chains, new suppliers, etc., and it just feels like there isn't a bit of there needs to be a bit of a vibe check at Dexcom, I think.
Yeah, now I feel like I need to make this video. It's like, do you have a sensor that's not Dexcom? Do you have problems with it? Like, comment below and see, try and get all the Medtronic and Libre users to tell me their problems.
To your point, Justin, I actually posted a story maybe a few months ago where literally on my Reddit feed, back to back, there was a post about frustration with Dexcom and a post about frustration with the Libre. And I posted that that meme from The Office, Pam, where it's like, these are the same picture, because it's true. Like like we've said kind of repeatedly throughout this conversation, like these are not unique to Dexcom per se. So it's not like, yeah, this isn't meant to pile on Dexcom. One thing I will kind of go further though on, and maybe my constructive feedback towards Dexcom is, I think I'm curious to hear how it launched in England, Kamil, but I think it's fairly widely accepted by the clinician community and probably the patient community that the launch of the G7 was not perfect in terms of the quality of the sensors, in terms of the quality of the signal. Reading your feedback from Dexcom kind of reminds me of back then, where I would talk to my rep and I'd be like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "No, it's fine. Like, everything is fine. Like, people will complain." And at first I was like, "Okay, that's fine." But it was very clear. Like, I could look at a CGM tracing in my report and I would immediately know whether they're using a G7 or not, just based on, how choppy and weird the signal was. And so it's like, I understand why as a company, especially when you kind of only make one primary product, which is CGM, why you don't want to necessarily say, "Hey, there's a problem with our product," right? That's obviously not going to be the best financial decision, but you also lose credibility or believability or trust over time if your answer every time is, "There's nothing wrong with our product. It's you, not us." Maybe in the short term, it might not be so good if they are like, "Hey, you know what? We are seeing an increase in complaints. We're investigating the issues." For users, it would give us confidence, and prescribers, it would give us confidence later when they're like, "Hey, we figured something out. We fixed it. Everything manufactured past February of 2025 is reliable. Go look for those sensors." Like, that's what we need, and that's what would give us trust in the product again.
Yeah, as a user, it's made me feel slightly uncomfortable or anxious about my tech. But luckily, like, I'm listening to the community and hearing that they feel the same thing. Like, at launch, yeah, for the first maybe 6 months of wearing G7, the connection was not so great. But then perfect, or not perfect, but it was great. I had no worries, and it wasn't until recently that some little things have come up. I don't like that I needed to find out this magnet answer from from the Discord I run, but like you can't, like, it's not something Dexcom saying, hey, by the way, some sensors went out. You just need to wave a magnet. Just like it's as simple as that. And that's not even like the worst thing to admit. It's a very little problem, but it seems to be something that would help a lot of people.
Yeah. I think in the short term, I would love to see them revisit some of the customer experience and sensor replacement policy. I think there's a part of operating at the scale which, I mean, these companies, over 1 million users. I mean, that's the last time I looked at the data, which actually I haven't looked at Dexcom active user base in a long time, so I'm sure it's way higher than that at this point. A few million for Libre because they're a significantly larger company. I think when you operate at those scales, like, inevitably, it's going to be impossible to have 100% like perfect supply chains, and logistically, operationally, it's very difficult. So I think that's why you kind of need to have a really human approach to when things don't go in the way that they should. Speaking from people from the community, it always feels like the sensor replacement process isn't as seamless as it could be. Obviously, there is if it's not a product failure, there is a cap on free goodwill sensors. And I know Dexcom has made it clear that if it's a product failure, they will replace it without a cap, which is very important to say. I think in practice, I think it's very difficult to actually have a good experience when you actually try to get those replacement sensors, because trying to distinguish between something that's a product failure and something that's a user failure actually is very difficult. So just I think in the short term, just being more flexible with the customer service and having better processes would go a long way.
Yeah, and even with the replacement policy for failed sensors, why I wanted to bring light to this was because I heard through comments that people weren't getting their replacements for 7 to 12 days, which is much longer than what is typical, which I believe is 3 to 5 days. And in the United States, at least, some health insurances only allow people to have 1 month supply at a time. So that means right now you're getting 3 Dexcoms. First one works great. Second one works great, whatever. The third one doesn't even connect to the app when you try to use it. There's 10 more days in the month and you don't have another sensor. Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. What are insurance companies? What is their role in all of this, David?
Yeah, I think this is where I got really excited on our kind of pre-call, in that I feel like this is just everything around this whole discussion, not just Dexcom. I feel like we should really almost like launch like a campaign to really raise awareness of this issue, to get more coverage for more sensors per month, right? So, for example, in the United States, if I have a patient who's Omnipod, they have to change out every 1.5 days or 2 days. I can write a prescription and say patient needs, a new pod every 2 days, even though the wear period's 3. And that patient will get 15 pods for a 30-day period. Same price, same monthly copay. I can't do that with a Dexcom or a Libre. I can say whatever I want in the prescription, but insurance will always cap that at 3 10-day sensors per 30 days or 2 15-day sensors per 30 days, which puts people in that bind that you're talking about. And of course, not to get deep into the woods, but now the fact that you can't extend any of these sensors using hacks also highlights that issue. really think we need to raise awareness and almost say, hey, this is not right, especially if these transcutaneous sensors have 75 to 80% failure rates, not going to the full 15-day or 10-day periods. Like, the math doesn't math here, right? Like, you're not getting enough sensors, and that's not right. That's not fair.
Yeah, and to be clear, that's not Dexcom's fault. Dexcom has created
Right.
a great product, a product that
Right.
helps us so much. But it's on, at least in the US, insurance companies to make sure that we have enough, that if they don't last that full amount of time, that we can still be using them, because these are life-saving technologies. They
sure.
are alerting people before they go too low and could pass out, and maybe something worse. And Kamil, something you touched on in your video, I've touched on my video, is that this new 15-day sensor's coming out. And, really buried in the press release was 26% of these sensors won't last the full 15 days. And that's based off of Dexcom studies. This is a legitimate statistic. Well, insurance companies don't read that. They're just giving you what you need. So, Kamil, shouldn't patients be getting more than just what they need for that month? If statistically, from Dexcom, 26% of them won't last 15 days.
Yeah, I think so much to unpack here. I think one point I make is, in Dexcom's defense, I actually think are trying their best to leverage the fact that they are becoming omni-channel in the way that you can get Dexcoms from your local pharmacy in the US, which is not the case in Europe. We have pharmacy-only sensors like Dexcom One. So I've heard of a few cases, I don't know if you guys heard this in the socials as well, but I've heard a few cases of people who have phoned Dexcom, kind of in a situation that you described earlier, Justin, where like, okay, I only got 3 sensors for the month. Actually, this last one failed, and I'm going away or something. And Dexcom customer service was able to give them like a voucher code so they can pick up a G7 in the pharmacy the same day. So the fact that they actually have started, I think it depends, as I've in the US, it depends on your insurance coverage and whatever to participate in pharmacy. But I think they have tried to leverage the fact that they are more omni-channel, that they have stock locally, not just in their central warehouses. So I think if you are in that situation, don't just fill in the online form, actually call them and make it clear that this is your last one, because that might be an option for you to actually pick one within the hour or so if your local pharmacy has some G7 stock.
Yeah, I think one thing to add there is that it also brings to light, and I think this is mostly passing, so I don't want to, redig up old wounds, but I think the shortages earlier this year are just another example of where I think the patient experience has not been smooth. I don't know what it was like in Europe, Kamil, but in the United States, especially like February and March, there were some shortages because there was a shipment, I guess that got lost, or not lost, but they weren't able to sell that product that was on a freight in the ocean. So they had shortages, and I think the way that was communicated, and a lot of patients of mine didn't realize that they should be calling around to different pharmacies. They thought they just had to wait, because they would call their pharmacy, and their pharmacy's like, we're out of stock for 2 months. And they're just like, oh, okay, I'll just wait here. And they didn't realize. And so I think the messaging could have been a lot better. And I think even now, I still hear scattered reports from my personal patients that they'll call Express Scripts or a pharmacy and get told that it's not in stock. So hopefully that's done, because they said it was going to be over by the end of March. But yeah, it's once again, just going to this like credibility, patient experience thing. There are concerns.
And widen this up to kind of other diabetes tech. This is not a Dexcom or just a CGM problem. Applies to test strips, it applies to insulin pumps, it applies to everything. Recently in Europe, we now have tandem users cannot, in the UK, we have shortage of the, like this one specific type of infusion set, which is the only one with the, like the metal cannula.
Oh, True Steel.
That's one, yeah. So that one is in like shortage. You cannot get it, so they kind of move in people to other cannulas. So that's just one local example that I've literally heard about last week.
Yeah, and Libre actually had shortages at the end of last year. So yeah, once again, not specific to Dexcom, but
yeah, and Fiasp, there was a FIASP shortage. Like, yeah, there's all these little pieces we need. There's shortages.
So that's why that's why the point I wanted to make is this is not a Dexcom problem. I think as we have rightly, I started YouTube in like 2017. I think as over the last decade, we've become to expect more from these companies, rightly, I believe so. Like, I think it all comes down to communication at the end of the day and just being really transparent. Because I would kind of expect Apple to be transparent about when my iPhone delivery is going to be when I buy a new phone. So like, I think the bar of service should be much higher than that, with transparency around supply chains and shortages, etc.
Yeah, I think going back to, my marketing campaign to increase supply, like I think that's what we should really push CGM manufacturers to pressure insurance companies for, right? Is that we should, we're not saying people should be getting as many sensors as they want. Obviously, there's fiscal responsibility, but maybe instead of 6 15-day sensors for a 90-day period, how about 7 15-day sensors for a 90-day period? Or, instead of 9 G7s for a 90-day period, how about 10 G7s for a 7-day period, right? Just a little bit of space or padding to have cushion so that you're not relying day to day for your next sensor. And I think part of this is as a community, as a medical community, we've been so eager to get better insurance coverage for Dexcoms, right? Initially, it started just with people with type 1 diabetes. Then it was people with type 2 on insulin. Now it's a lot of people with type 2 diabetes. Like, it was so new to us. I liken it to when the iPhone came out, right? Like with the first 5 generations of the iPhone, it's like you could do nothing wrong, right? But once we got used to the iPhone, we started to get a little bit more picky. It was like, hey, what about the battery life? What about the signal loss? Things like that. And so I feel like we're at that point with CGM now where it's become such an integral part of people's lives, especially with people with type 1 diabetes, that I think now we should go to insurance companies and say, thank you so much for covering it for the people that need it. But I think we should shift as a medical community, instead of trying to focus on expanding the market to wellness and things like that, like, let's make sure that the people that absolutely need it the most, not to say that it's horrible as a wellness product, but the people that absolutely need it the most really need as much supply as possible. Like, I'd even be okay with maybe saying, if you have type 1 diabetes, you're allowed 1 extra sensor per month, but only if you have type 1 diabetes or something like that. Like, we need to start having these conversations with insurance companies. But I think the sensor companies, they're so quick to they want to get coverage that they're probably going to the insurance companies and being like, hey, now our sensor's 15 days. You only need to pay for 2 a month when you previously needed to pay for 3 a month. Instead, maybe they should say, for the same price, now your patients will be more protected.
Yeah, and that's what worries me a little bit, because people may only have 2 sensors, the odds of them going time without CGM because those failed, it's more likely. And so I hope, I don't necessarily need an extra sensor for my 90-day supply until I'm coming toward that end, and I only have that 3, 2 or 1 sensors left. My main worry is for these people, at least in the US, that are only allowed to get this 1 month supply at a time. And they're more likely to go time without a sensor if there are these failures.
Environmental perspective, it's mind-boggling to me that you would only ship someone, they would willingly send 12 shipments to a single person. How many people with type 1 are there in the US? I lost count. Like, it's just mind-boggling that you wouldn't, like, from a practical perspective, actually do it for a quarter.
Right?
As a senior financial analyst, I look at that and I go, it makes no financial sense, because you double in your shipment costs. Cash flow perspective, I guess you bill in for that. It just makes no sense for nobody involved.
You would probably cut down on customer support staff as well.
Final words. Is there something directly that you think that Dexcom and other companies in this realm industry can do better to help their patients in these moments of device failure?
I mean, I do like, part of me like feels for them, because they operate in an ecosystem where they need to balance regulators, investors, very vocal user group, they actually are medical companies, but even though sometimes if so I actually do they under a lot of different, they have a lot of stakeholders to manage. So I do want to make that clear. I just think increased transparency as much as possible within the scope that it's possible. I think that's probably my single goal.
Yeah, and I think increased transparency could mean increased user satisfaction, people speaking more optimistic and positively about your brand.
Yeah. I think, for my closing comments, I feel like I always try to tie everything to this, but for me, it's interesting because this is all coming at a time where there's probably more competition and alternatives in the type 1 CGM space than ever before. We're behind you, Kamil, with the Simplera approval in the United States, but Medtronic has a new sensor out. Libre 3 Plus is really making a push into the type 1 space. Eversense just got their first pump partner announced in the United States. And really, this is kind of the first time where we've had multiple good options coming on the market. And so I love that because I think it just kind of lights a fire under everybody to be better and to, hopefully bring down prices, to innovate more. And so, that's what I get excited about. Because I think before, sometimes it just felt like it's like, oh, well, there's really no one else I can go to. So even though I'm having a bad experience or I'm having trouble, like I'm stuck. But now I think consumers do have the options to kind of take their business elsewhere. But maybe if I've been a little bit harsh on Dexcom, I will say like their user experience, like their app user experience is like unsurpassed. I mean, I think it's fantastic. Direct to watch, amazing. The app experience, amazing. The form factor, amazing. 30-minute warm up time, amazing. Like it's such a great product that I just don't want them to kind of waste all the goodwill they've built over the past 10 years because they're a fantastic company and they really built the CGM market and they've really been a type 1 company first and foremost. And I just hope that they can preserve that relationship.
Great. Well, Kamil, David, thank you so much for coming on the show. What a powerhouse. This was a great conversation. And yeah, and hopefully we'll see some change out of this. Maybe insurance companies, at least in the US, can, just be a little better about making sure people don't go without sensors, that they don't have to do that. Well, thank you so much. And I hope to see both of you at a conference soon.
88. Kamil, are you going to be there?
I'll see you there.
I'm not an ADA, no, but have a great
bummer.
time.
Okay. All right. Well, ATTD when we go to your side of the pond.
Sure.
Sounds good. Now, I want to hear about your experiences with the tech. If you wear a CGM, let me know what your problems are with the devices that you're wearing, any issues that have come up down in the comments on YouTube. And if you want to follow our guest, Nerdabetic, on YouTube, run by Kamil and Dr. David Ahn, he's on socials. You can find links to their socials down in the show notes. And as always, to stay up to date on the latest in diabetes tech news and innovation, make sure you are subscribed and are reading our newsletter and blog, diabetic.info. There is a link to that in the show notes. So if you want to be on the cutting edge of all news in the diabetes space, you got to make sure that you're following me over there. All right, I'll see you next week.